comes blocked like that?
It's a blank like this.
Okay.
Actually, this one looks pretty good. Most of them don't look this good.
Okay.
So, but it goes in here. And
Now, when you're putting that in the middle, is that determining the size?
it's determining both the size and the open crown shape, which you have different open crown shapes for different styles of hats.
Okay.
So, whatever hat you're gonna make.
So what type of hat's that going to be? Just
This is, actually, I use this one for about 2/3 of what I make.
okay.
So
So it's
And it
standard
goes in
cowboy
there.
hat.
standard cowboy hat, standard fedora, even some of the derbies if they want them a little taller.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll go on that one. But it stays in there for a while. The brim would be pressed out flat, which is what that's doing over there. And then,
We got to have a good air filter in here, huh?
yeah, it's got its own AC return and everything else. So, and that, there.
What does that do?
That is a crown iron, and it evens out. It irons the felt around the crown so you get an even thickness all the way around. So you don't have high and low spots, and it moves around and peaks as it does it. Once you're done with that, then the sanding and the real dirty part starts.
Okay.
And the sanding takes hours. And
So-
you go back and forth between steaming out there and coming back here and sanding and going back out and steaming some more and coming back in and sanding.
And you're sanding just to get the
To
texture
get
you
the
want?
smooth surface,
Okay.
get the good surface on it. And the better the surface you get, the more durable the hat is, because it kind of, it doesn't really seal the fur, but it makes it tighter if you do it right. So it makes it more impervious to water and the elements.
Okay. And is it easier to work with a better quality?
Yes.
Okay.
From one guy, the brim press there, the plating machine, I got from another one, and then the bound edge machine.
How long does this date back to?
That's actually a fairly new one. That's 1940s-ish, 30s, 40s. So,
We watched a little clip of the Peter Brothers little blurb on Texas Reporter, and he goes, "Yeah, this is our new shop. We opened this one in 1933."
yeah. That's actually where I started at.
That's awesome.
So you learned to make hats at Peter Brothers in Fort Worth?
That's where I started learning.
You were
Yeah.
a student at TCU? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Theater design was my degree.
Really?
And I started working for Peter's Brothers. I worked there for 6 years off and on during college and after.
Okay.
And then met somebody and got married and had to get a real job and found some equipment and started my own side business making hats. And
So the top ones, some of them have the divots in them.
yeah, I really, for the most part, only use those when I'm doing straw hats.
Okay.
Straw hats, especially the dress hats, are a lot harder to hand crease because they're a lot softer. They just don't hold the shape that well. So you use those for the like the Panama straw hats and stuff.
Okay.
Western straw hats you can pretty much hand crease them because of how much stiffener and shellac they've got on them. So.
And clearly you can make any hat that's not a baseball cap.
Oh yeah, any kind of felt hat. I've made top hats, derbies, fedoras, Hamburgs, Western hats.
When we eventually get to go to the Kentucky Derby, we're coming down here and getting hats.
That's for sure.
And, like, I do a lot of copying hats from old pictures and old movies, and you know,
Yeah.
that's actually a really easy way to do it. So he goes, I want a hat like this, but I want it just a little bit different in this color. And
Well, that's the way I'm looking at this. Like I told him, I was looking at Clint Eastwood in Unforgiven. I was looking at Paul
Yeah.
Newman and in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and I was like, none of those are exactly the hat I want. And then that's when I realized it's the man who makes the hat sometimes. Yeah.
It's and they real like the one I'm wearing looked a lot different when I first made it.
Mm-hmm.
And they take on a character as you wear them and handle them, and it becomes really individualized long term. And
But you got to put the work in.
Well, that's one of the annoyances I have with all of the pre-distressed hats that are out there now. It's like, well, that's great, but if
There's no
you
story.
actually wore it for 5 years or 8 years or 10 years, it would look completely different. It would still be worn and distressed and everything else, but it would look very different.
Yeah.
You know, so.
All right, well, let's get started, man.
So like the cattleman style,
Yeah.
the crown on this is too tall, I think.
Yeah. Not by much though.
Yeah. And more like that.
Narrow to the back.
Yeah.
So what is the cattleman where it comes across flat
It's
in the front?
the one that's level and it's got the 3 dents. It was the standard crease through the 70s, through the 80s and 90s. And really it wasn't until, you know, the early 2000s people started going back to a lot of the old creases, and now that's become big deal. It's like that brown one over there with the horseshoe in it. A lot of people will ask me, when they just first start talking to me about getting a hat, a lot of the older guys will ask if I can do a horseshoe crease, just because they feel like if you can do that one, you can do whatever they want.
What's the horseshoe
It's
crease?
the brown one here that
Oh, yeah, you got the extra.
It's, you know, it was big in the 50s up around Fort Worth, Dallas area.
Mm-hmm. So what are you aiming for in terms of the height? If Dave said it's a little high, what are you trying to go to?
4 inches right at the peak right here, because his is almost 4 1/4.
I had no idea that you could completely, I figured once it had its shape, it was almost permanent creases.
It's always better if you actually take it apart to reblock it, because
Okay.
you know, you can do it with the sweatband and everything in there, but you end up with a line going around it.
Yeah. See, Blair wanted one that looks really worn. So really what you need to do is mow the yard in July.
Yeah.
Yep.
Just swept the hell through it.
That'll do it.
Now, when you set these things down, are you supposed to set them upside down?
Upside down, or you can set it where the front,
Hangs
you
off.
know, it'll be bent down, it'll where it hangs off.
And the quality of this versus like a 10X.
A 10X barely has any beaver in it.
Really?
Anything 10X or less, I mean, you're talking 10%, 15. You get a really good one, it's going to be 20% beaver.
What's the other stuff made out of?
Rabbit. If you're talking about a 20X, generally you're getting a 50-50 blend
Okay.
of beaver and rabbit.
But these are 100%
These are
beaver.
100X pure beaver. And when you're looking at vintage hats, if they come from the 60s, right up till through a good part of the 70s, a 10X was a pure beaver hat.
Okay.
Um,
That's what I always thought.
yeah, but it was, and really anything that was a 7X or better was a pure beaver hat.
So just like all products, they figured out a cheaper way to.
Part of the story I was told at one point was that hat makers used to buy, because in the, so up until getting into the 70s, the fur coat industry that was making beaver fur coats was using big panels of the beaver. They were cutting rectangles out of the pelts, and you had all those little scraps, the edges. Well, the hat companies would buy all the scraps from the fur coat companies. And they would use those, and coincidentally, that's the part of the beaver pelt that actually makes the best hat.
Okay,
It is.
so it's fortuitous.
The belly and the legs and the underneath the face, because it's an even finer hair than the rest of the beaver hair. And then you get into the 70s, and in order to use as much materials as possible, the fur coat industry started cutting the pelts into strips and sewing them back together and using all of the pelts. So the hat companies had to actually compete with the fur coat companies to buy the pelts in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when you started getting a lot more, you put more X's in a hat to indicate it was a better quality of beaver. You put more rabbit into some of your blends so that you didn't have to use as much beaver.
Amazing how a little steam makes that so malleable.
Isn't that
And
crazy?
it's stiff as a board otherwise. Be badass, Dave, if you got one with a beaver tail hanging off the back. Yeah, that looks good already. Moves quick.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Pretty
That
cool.
turned out great.
So you don't even have to fiddle part with that? You like it right as is?
As is.
I think it's weird. There's only a few of us around that have actually done an internship with a hatter.
Mm-hmm.
Most people kind of are self-taught.
So this is the Fort Worth crease you're putting in here. I'm going blank on the guy who's got the exit right by the DFW airport made of Eamon Carter. You think Eamon Carter had a little Fort Worth crease in his hat?
Peter's brothers actually used to make his hats. And the hat that Peter's brothers made was the one that Stetson copied to make the open road.
Really?
Yeah. That's where that style got started.
From Eamon Carter and Peter's brothers.